There's a parable told of St. Francis of Assisi, who was the patron saint of animals. We all know that he could converse and communicate with animals. One night, he entered a village, and when he got there, the villagers were up in arms, carrying torches and pitchforks and spears and swords, and they were on their way into the forest to hunt and kill a wolf that had been coming into the village in the middle of the night and killing their livestock and eating their chickens. And Francis convinced them, let me try before you go in and do that. So Francis went into the forest. He found the wolf, and he asked him, why do you keep going into the village at night and killing the livestock and eating the chickens? And Wolf said, because I'm hungry. So Francis went back into the village and told the village people, you don't have to kill the wolf. Just feed him. If you feed the wolf will not attack. And so every night the village people would leave food for the wolf at the edge of the forest, and the wolf would come as far as the food, eat his fill, and go back in, and they never had trouble with the wolf again. Feed the wolf, and the wolf will not attack. The Samaritan people were descendants of Abraham. The Samaritan people were from the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. They were part of the northern kingdom when the kingdom split after King Solomon. The kingdom split into two, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah, where Jerusalem is. The capital of the northern kingdom was Samaria. The northern kingdom fell to the conquerors, the Assyrians. And when the Assyrians took over the northern kingdom, they exiled the most prominent Jews of the northern kingdom and replaced them with various Gentiles from among their empire. Over the course of the years, people intermarried, intermingled, and so their blood was seen as impure. About 100 years later, the southern kingdom fell to Babylon, and same thing happened to them, and they were sent into exile. When they returned from exile, they were just as mixed as the people from Samaria. But when the people of Samaria offered assistance in rebuilding the temple, the people of Judah were offended, and they refused, and animosity began to build. And it built and built and built over the course of years, so that at times there was open conflict. Now, Samaria, the cities that were Samaritan, were south of Galilee and north of Jerusalem. So every faithful Jew from Galilee would walk around the cities that were Samaritan in order to get to Jerusalem, except Jesus. Jesus never circumvented difficulty. Jesus always went straight through. And so he is now going through the Samaritan towns where there is open conflict between Jews and Samaritans. And he encounters a woman. Women were not second-rate citizens of Israel. They weren't considered citizens at all. They had zero rights. Women and men were never together. They never mingled. They never greeted each other. To do so would put the woman at risk of having a bad reputation. Her husband could divorce her for speaking to another man in the street. So when Jesus comes to the well, He doesn't see a Samaritan. He doesn't see a woman. He doesn't see a public sinner. Jesus sees a hungry wolf. And Jesus feeds the hungry wolves. There are a couple of details in the story that we can sometimes just really gloss over, like the time of day. John says, just matter-of-factly, it was around noon, but that's important because nobody went to the well at noon to get water. It was a laborious job that you just didn't do when the sun was at its height. You did it either early morning before the sun got too hot or later in the evening when the sun was beginning to set. You never went at noon. Nobody went at noon. They also never went alone. Women never traveled by themselves because, again, it opened themselves up to all kinds of rumors, all kinds of whispers, all kinds of accusations. So they were never alone, and they never went at noon. So when Jesus came to the well, he knew her story. He might not have known the details, but he knew her story. Here was a public sinner. Here was somebody that avoided the crowds at all costs, came when nobody else was there on purpose, so that she didn't have to face the ridicule, the hatred, the violence, the names. She could go alone, by herself, because her reputation was already shot. She had nothing to lose. When I was on retreat, I had books that I had planned to read, and as the Lord often does, he disrupted that, and I was offered another book, which is not usually the kind of books that I would read. It was not written by a spiritual writer or a renowned Christian spiritual man. It was a man by the name of Francis Weller, who is a psychoanalyst. And he works a lot with grief. And he said over the course of his career, he discovered that there are really 5 gates of grief, not stages. The stages of grief are different. But there are 5 gates or thresholds through which we can enter and embrace sorrow. The first gate of grief or threshold of sorrow is one that we're all familiar with. It's the loss of someone or something we love, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a spouse, the loss of a friendship. We grieve those, and we know more or less how to grieve those losses. But then there's the second gate, which is the grieving over parts of ourselves that have never known love. We will not find in all of literature a better illustration than the Samaritan woman at the well. The Samaritan woman at the well who kept on just pushing down the pain, pushing down the inconvenience, pushing down and condensing her grief at having lost things that she didn't even know she was grieving. She began to accommodate other people's hatred of her. She began to accommodate everybody else's judgments of her. She began to accommodate an injustice that allowed her to be treated that way. She accommodated in her life everything else and just pushed it down. There are parts of the Samaritan woman at the well that never knew love. And it was to that person that Jesus spoke. Jesus came, and when he first asked her for a drink of water, it sounds as though he was being very demanding and imperious, but he was not. In Mediterranean culture, and it's still the same today, but in Mediterranean culture, if you do me a favor, then I am indebted to you. Think of The Godfather. The Don had no problem doing favors for people, and he would say, there may come a time when I will ask something of you. That was the way Mediterranean cultures worked. So when Jesus asked her to get him a drink of water, he was offering to become indebted to her. And she was shocked. And how can you, a Jew, and she spit that word out, ask me, a Samaritan woman, for a drink? But Jesus saw that what was happening there was that she had gone to the gate, gone to that threshold, and just couldn't go in alone. What Jesus saw was a hungry wolf that was getting ready to attack. And so what Jesus did was feed that wolf. What Jesus did was take her hand and lead her into that grief, lead her into that sorrow, lead her into that suffering. It's what he does with all of us. Jesus let it be known with no question that, yes, I am the Savior of the world. Yes, I am the Messiah that you have been waiting for. And yes, I know everything about your life. And yes, I know everything that you have done, and I know whom you did it with. And still I stand here and say, I want to be indebted to you. Still I stand here and say, help me be a part of this. Still I say, let me feed that wolf. And when she finally relented, and Jesus did bring her through that threshold and through the other side, she left her jug and went back into the village. It's another detail that often gets just elided over. She left her jug behind. That jug is the symbol of every accommodation she had ever made to allow other people to hate her, to allow other people to hurt her, to allow other people to judge her, to allow other people to call her whatever they want. The jug represented everything she had ever done to accommodate other people's injustice. And she left it behind and went right to those very people that made her carry it in the first place. And when she did not go as a vindictive person. She went as a redeemed daughter of God and offered the same to all those people who had done nothing but hurt her. When we follow Jesus through that threshold, when we take his hand and let him lead us through the pain, through the emptiness, through the grief, we come out on the other side a redeemed and full and fully fed person. This is the first of 3 scrutinies. And it is a time when the church asks us to do that difficult work of going to the threshold of pain, going to the threshold of grief, that threshold of sorrow, to look at everything that we have ever pushed down in there, to look at everything that we have ever done to accommodate other people, to allow other people to judge us and hate us and hurt us and act unjustly. And we do. We're told your hair and your clothing are too ethnic, and so we accommodate that. We look on TV and we see all kinds of injustice happening, but we stay silent because we don't want to be seen as just another angry woman or another angry black man, and so we accommodate it by staying silent. There are all kinds of things we do in our lives that accommodate people who hate us, that accommodate people who judge us and will act unjustly against us. There are things we do and we push it down and we say it's not worth it. We say it doesn't matter. We say things will never change. We give up our hope. We give up the best of who we are, and we create that threshold of a part of our lives that we will not ever let know love. That is exactly where Jesus wants to touch. All those places in our lives that we feel empty. All those areas in our lives that we feel are unlovable, unwantable, untouchable. That is exactly what Jesus wants us to go with. He wants to come in and feed that wolf. Because we all know hungry wolves attack. As the people coming into the living waters of baptism to be renewed, we go with them. And we do the same scrutinies that they do. And we scrutinize our lives, and we look for that part of our lives that we have just pushed down. The part of our lives that we have never allowed to be seen. The part of our lives that we think are so unlovable, untouchable, and unwantable. That part of our lives that we are just trying to hunt and kill. And when we find them, we let Jesus feed them. In the scrutiny, we leave whatever jug we're carrying and we go through the threshold with courage. Because if we want the joy of Easter, we cannot go around the cross. If we want to be those redeemed people of God, the only way to it is through it. And so we go with Jesus. We scrutinize our lives, and we let him feed our wolves.